What's up, guys? You probably read it already. Indras are pretty freaking strong. Some people are even calling for a balance patch like emergency thing to nerf them, especially on the Chakra. But let's look at where the damage comes from, how strong they are, where can they be used, how can they be used, and what kind of build should you be putting on them. So the two that I will be focusing on in this video is going to be the Chakra and the Phantom. So what was the buff in the first place if you did miss that? So currently the Wild Bolt skill does do 2 hits. So they did mention that it was going to do the same damage, but it's going to be doing the same damage for the Wild Bolt. They didn't mention anything about the passive, and the passive is where the damage from the Chakra really comes from. So in the case of Chakra, he's kind of like a Miles-ish kind of thing. However, Miles doesn't have damage increased by a defense break, whereas this thing actually does have that. And same thing for the Phantom, he does more on his passive, so in this case there's no added damage by speed or anything like that. But there is still a lot of pushback value on this, and there's a lot of silence value and a lot of those kind of values. So I actually did use both of them in the last siege. So I will be showcase those 2 hits. And after that, we will go into some of the builds and showcase like where does the damage come from, how should you build them, should you use them for RTA, should you use them in this kind of style. So first one that I used was this one over here. And that was just like typical defense break into a nuker. So let's see what this kind of nuker style could do. I will showcase the runes later. I don't have them runed up anymore as it was before. So we have a 10 hit, so 10k does also provide the branding itself, which is really nice. But it's a 10k times 2. And then we also have like 2 more times that, but then on a slightly lower damage output. So in the end, good bit of damage, good bit of pushback, which gave me the chance for the S2 over here, which is kind of like a chunk punk kind of style, but a little bit less pushback than that. The other team that I used, actually, I took from something that I did see on Reddit, which was kind of funny looking, which is we have this thing move super fast. With this thing moving super fast, he can go in the Thunder state, use the Bolt. So in this case, we're already doing a 8k damage. I didn't have that much accuracy. These things apparently have decent bit of resistance because it didn't really land on those properly. So we had 8k per hit over there. Then we can give attack buff and speed buff, and I'm speed increasing effect on this one. And then we're doing 11k on the crits and 15k on the hit over there. So in the end, did not fully kill as I was hoping to. You can build this thing relatively tanky and still do a lot of damage. But it did kind of work out. It was a funny team, but let's actually look at some of the builds and how they can do a lot of damage. And even the question, do you actually have to go full damage build on them to do proper damage? So we're going to start off with the Chakra and try to do some damage output on that unit. Okay, this is the lineup that we're going to be hitting today. And let's start off with Chakra. So let's first try to start off of a build that is recommended in RTA. And the RTA build that is recommended on him is actually just a fairly simple speed, HP kind of style with high accuracy and just a lot of speedy stats while being very tanky. So we're going to do exactly that for this first rotation. So we have a good bit of accuracy in there. And then we're just going to be tanky as hell. And then just see how much damage can something like this already do. Artifact-wise, in this case, I'm not 100% sure what would work. We're actually going to be testing if artifacts damage on X element do actually improve the damage. Because in the case of a Miles, damage X element does not work on it. So for the first test, I'm just going to leave the artifacts as is. And then we'll be changing this one out for damage on light later on. So in this case, we're going to go no setup, just cleanly see how much damage are we dealing against those kind of units. Of course, we're going in the Thunder state. And we're going to be hitting for the damage. How much are we looking at? We're looking at a good 7k or let's say 8k on units that don't have any defense and like 7 or 5 or 6k on units that do have some defense. So good bit of damage, but also not the most crazy of amount. So let's see if we go for damage on light, if we do see more damage on that unit altogether, if that does actually work. So in this case, we did have an attacker over there, damage light with a 17. So we should definitely see a significant difference in that if we do add this in right now. Okay, back in the Thunder state, let's see how much damage are we looking at. We are definitely seeing substantial more damage over here. We had like 7k last round, so damage on X element does actually work. We can also get crits on this. So let's see if we were to go for crit rate 4, if we would add a lot more damage to it, or does it kind of remain the same? Because in the end, the damage is amplified on your passive, and the passive part is not really the critting part. So you can still crit for the base stats that you have over here and over here, or like the base multiplier that you have over here. But apparently the crit doesn't really work on this, similar to, let's say, a Feng Yang. So we added in a crit 4. We're not going to full crit, but just for the idea of it, what is the big difference for landing a crit or not landing a crit? So we did about 10k on the second hit on that Dova earlier, but that was on a death break. And it does seem that the critical hits... Does the critical hit really do that much more? No, it doesn't really see that much more. So we also did not crit that much, but I want to see that again. I kind of want to get like a second crit hit on a branding on the Dova, because that was the 10k point something hit. So that's easy for me to have a reference point too. Let's see. Okay, not really once again. Also, we did get a good bit of critical. So in the end, critical damage doesn't really amplify that much damage as it seems. So it's more the damage from the passive, so you don't really have to go crit rate or anything on this unit to make it shine on more damage. It's just more about the speed. So if we go back to this, like sure, in the end, it did do a little bit more damage, but it was very much insignificant that I would higher recommend to go for more HP. How about if we go for full attack on the 4? Let's see if attack on the 4 actually does add more damage to it. Or is it still just fully on that passive with the scaling from the speed and you do only damage from that speed coming in? Let's see what we have over here on this hit right now. It seems to be pretty much similar-ish. You can also see that these were actually both critted. Yeah, the crits really don't do anything for more damage. And this seems to be kind of similar-ish damage as well. The 10k was from a branded hit, so we didn't get the brand in there, so therefore we do the less damage. That is definitely interesting finding right there. So actually the accuracy build, or not the accuracy build, just the HP build is probably the fine way to do enough damage already. But then the next question, of course, is does he do more damage on a defense break? Because defense break, as mentioned for Miles, does not work. Let's see if it does work for him. Our defense breaker of today will be this Gemini. And just to keep it fair, I'm not going to put any fight sets or anything on it to amplify damage even more. We're just going to be seeing here if this damage does get improved by a lot, or is it going to be something that's just a significant kind of change, or is it a minor change right there? So we're not going to put leader skills, because leader skill would actually give more speed. More speed would end up in more damage. We're going to go for full damage hit later on. So if we go for the fly, we do have damage break on most of them. That is totally fine. Let's see how much more damage we would do to this Dova right now. So we're back at the build with the HP 4. So we had 8Ks before. We're doing 19Ks and 20Ks right now. Wow. Okay, so Death Break is definitely a very substantial factor, which makes this unit do a lot more damage. So crit rate is not really amplifying damage, but armor breaks is highly amplifying damage. This is where we see a lot of damage. That's also where you see no Death Break into Death Break. This Death Break seems to be doing like straight up like 10k more damage per hit. That is absolutely insane. So he's definitely hungry for a Death Break, which makes him an interesting unit itself as well. Because he is somewhat of a setup of a strip, because he does strip in his skill. But he's also kind of a follow-up, because in the end, when there's a Death Break already, he does do a good amount of damage. So let's actually check this. Let's say that we add an attack buff. So attack buff, Death Break, do we do a lot more damage? And then we're going to try to add in a speed buff and see if the speed buff adds even way more. So first of all, for the attack buff, we're just going to go for a simple Galleon in there. Okay, Galleon will move in front, but that's totally fine because we have the Gemini to strip regardless. Anyways, so let's see how much damage we're looking at right then. Because in the end, keep in mind, this is still the same build with just like 186 extra speed. That's the only thing that's pretty much added to this thing. Like there's nothing special on this whatsoever. However, there's still the damage on light. There's still 17% damage on light. But let's see if the attack buff is a significant difference. A little bit. It's like adding like 1k-ish extra damage. It's really mediocre, not noticeable. What is very noticeable is the hit between a brand and a non-brand. Like the brand and the non-brand hit is definitely very noticeable right there. So let's actually, instead of this, add in a speed buff. So we're going to go attack buff, speed buff. Or no, let's actually just go speed buff. Because the attack buff would add a little bit as well. I just want to see the value of a speed buff into this and then see if that adds a lot more damage or not. So that's where we will have our speed buff, and we're still not taking in the speed lead because I want to have fair comparisons. At some point we're going to go for like a full-on proper like super high damage hit Nuker style and to see how much we get over there. So okay, we don't have the hit over there, but we have the speed buff. Speed buff is only nullified to like 1 turn. And we're looking at actually not that much. Well, we did not get the brand over there. And I think this brand is landed on the second hit as well. So actually not as much damage improvement as I expected it to be. So it's just the death break that's seemingly adding the most value right here, rather than anything else. So that's kind of interesting. So once again, let's go for the Thunder. And let's see, maybe there was just no brand on the first hit, and that's why the damage... Yeah, there's a bit more damage. There's definitely a bit more damage with the speed buff, but I kind of was expecting more damage out of it. But now let's see if we make him into a full-on nuker. So let's actually make him super fast, and let's still give him speed. So we're just gonna throw whatever speeds I can find on him, maybe something along the lines of this, into this, into this, into this, this. That's fairly fast. He's not gonna have a death break right now, but how can I get a death break at this speed though? Okay, I had to lower him a little bit in speed, otherwise couldn't make the Gemini move in front. And this guy should not be that hard to also still move in front. Okay, turn order is correct right now, and let's also add in the speed lead just for the idea of it. And let's see if this speed improvement that we just made, because he's currently sitting at a lot and a lot more speed, let's see if that actually makes a significant difference in how much damage output he has. Or is it just a bit of speed and the death break and you're already kind of good to go? So let's see how much damage we're looking at. 24k into 37k. That is a massive nuke. And wow, okay, I did get criticals on some of the hits, which is definitely a bit of a difference as well, because he's actually on a crit damage 4 in this build. But that is a really insane hit right there. So let's actually add a little bit more to it, where we're gonna go for a speed up effect. Oh wait, the right side already had a speed up effect. Do we have more speed up effect on the right side? Yeah, the best speed up effect I have over here is this. I will be doing less damage if I remove the light, but let's see if I have a light in combination with a speed up effect or anything like that. Light with speed up effect, yep, sure. This is actually a defense base. Well, defense doesn't really matter on that at all. I would also have to make sure that you're not underspeeding this right now. This one over here would have to make sure that you still move in front. So a 25er plus a 24 would definitely make you move in front. Let's test out this damage, and then we're gonna go for the next step. We're adding a Debra, because I can't do like proper damage testing without a Debra, right? That is always the thing. So once again, death break did not land on all. That's totally fine. We don't really care. Thunder state, let's go. So adding more speed on top of the more speed. How much damage are we dealing right now? We're looking at 2637. So no brand on this on that second hit, but it did not add that much actually. But still, good bit of hits. That's actually a fair bit of damage. But I would definitely say that he feels more to me as a Vio or a maybe Despair unit. Well, I would say mainly Vio unit probably, for the main reason that you do want to use him. As mentioned, we got to, of course, add in the Debra, because just as funny, I could add a lot of fight sets to everything, but fight sets don't really actually change anything all too much, because it's just all about them speeds. So if we go for this, Thunder State, I'm aiming like 70-ish K on the Dova or so. What are we hitting for? Okay, a little bit less. So still good damage throughout. Is this a team that I would really recommend people to use altogether for an arena offense? Probably not. I think he's, in the end, the build that you do want to run him in is one of those builds that we showed early on. You probably just want to go, like, it depends if you want to make him as a main strip or not. But it would not be bad if you just go like a pure on super fast Vio set on him, and you just make your way work from there, where you just use a lot of stats on something along the lines of this, where he's just, okay, maybe a little bit more tanky would be nice. This is actually not tanky at all. We can do more tanky if we do something like this, and then we have to actually put will runes, let's say, over there, and will rune over there, and then we go for another Vio one over there, something like this. It's maybe a little bit overdone on the accuracy, but this is kind of the build that I would recommend on it, because this build itself will already do more than enough damage. Sure, you're not always going to have the speed buff, sure, you're not always going to have the defense break, but if those would be there, then this guy already does do an absurd and insane amount of damage. Like, if that is your RTA setup on a Vio unit, that is absolutely absurd. Plus, He still has the usability of providing debuffs, providing strip, and this is just straight up a Fio set. So what I would recommend for artifacts is probably for people, if you don't max out the accuracy, you probably go for an accuracy S2. You could go for additional damage by speed, but additional damage by speed is actually not going to add you that much. Actually, this one is kind of fitting for it. It's my Sierra artifact right now. But this is actually quite fitting for it, to be honest. Oh, wait, the branding goes on the S2 and the strip goes on the S3. So maybe you could rather want to have accuracy S3. So maybe a bit of accuracy S2, S3. And then on the left side, damage on X element that you want to kill does actually work. If you're not entirely sure what you're hitting, you could always go minus damage. That's also an option right there. So that is my recommendation for the build in this unit. Where would I recommend to use it? I think it's mainly an RTA unit. I could see it being used for an arena offense as a strip, but I kind of fear that he would do too much damage and you would start triggering some nemesis and those kind of things. But in the end, he does have a pretty substantial, decent slot for a strip. You could maybe, is there a kind of way where you go for, let's say, Trinity plus this thing plus... Would you do enough damage with that? Because I could see a way where you go Trinity, Kabila, this unit right here, and then a Deathbreaker. That can maybe also provide more damage. Yeah, that would actually be an insane team. If you go Trinity, Kabila, Eludia, this thing, you would do an insane amount of damage. That's definitely one of those damage setups that I would say is like, yo, that's insane. You could also go for, let's say, a Samath, Asher, Chakra, and then a Deathbreaker that also provides some kind of damage, maybe pushback. I'm thinking something along the lines of a Lisel, the vampire on water, or anything like that. There's a bunch of options that you could maybe go for. It's just a little bit awkward that he has where he wants to deal damage, but he also wants to be your strip. He can be a little bit of both. But in the end, we've seen a lot of people play with this in RTA, and it does do a good bit of damage. So let's move on to the next unit, the Venton. It's a little bit more straightforward because it's just straight up dealing damage. And therefore also, I think in his case, his build is a lot more straightforward of not having anything as like, yo, the damage just comes from wherever the damage comes from. So in this case, your attack power is increased by 100 once you're in the thundered state. So it's not adding on the speed, it's just adding on your attack power. And while trying to make some rune space to rune up this unit, I just got this rune because I had no rune space and I had to sell a bunch of stuff, so I just got this one while I wasn't talking. Interesting one. However, what I did want to do is just add the most amount of damage that I have on this unit towards this unit. So we're going to go for a little bit of a hybrid damage-ish speedy set, and then we're going to add in a full-on damage set later. So in the case of him, he does get 100 extra attack for all of the attack he already has in the Thunder state. So I think for that reason, you should focus a good bit on attack, but crit damage is definitely still very important as well. His main damage will come from a skill 2 crit damage, and we of course can still do damage on X element for whatever element we're hitting, and that would do the most amount of damage out there. So in this case, let's still use the same team, and then we're gonna get in a attack buff later for like whatever. So let's see how much damage he can do with his wild bolt on that skill. So in this case, we don't have any attack buff. If you were to go for full nuking state, I don't think it's as much of an RTA unit as maybe just a siege offense unit. We do have chances for multiple pushbacks, which does make it a little bit where... Actually, I have one really good unit in mind for this, because right now, we're seeing a lot of resistance back and forth, right? But you know how we can prevent those resistance from happening. And of course, he goes a second time. I already completely forgot about that. But you see the resistance happen. But there's, of course, one unit that removes all of the chances for resistance. And that is, of course, Tanjiro. So let's also add that in with an Adriana, so we will have our buffs. And let's pretend it's arena offense where we just go on triple fighters. Okay, can't really triple fight this one as well on the exact speed. So, or maybe I can, I don't know. I just don't want to test it. So... let's just add in a little bit of stats on you, just by Swift, just to make my life a little bit easier. Okay, that is totally fine for the tuning still, because the Tanjiro doesn't really need attack buff in the first place. So let's see how much we can do with this, and also let's see how much stronger it feels like for the pushbacks in the first place. So in this case, we do have attack buff. I'm also going to be trying it without the attack buff, if you can just use that in Siege, because Without attack buff, you're just going to use these 3. Keep in mind that the Tanjiro does have a crit rate lead, so you can still utilize that crit rate lead to go for proper pushbacks that way. So in this case, let's see how much damage we are dealing with all of this. Also, we will have the branding starting from the first hit, and we're looking at 27Ks coming into another round of, okay, second hit is worse, but how much damage is that in total? Let's say double 27 into double 14. Then we're looking at 82k damage, and I think that was the damage over here. I'm not sure if that should be the one damage over there. That's 82k damage. That is a lot and a lot of damage. So let's look at it from the idea of, like, let's say that we're using this, and you can definitely slow this down a bit. You can definitely also make the crit rate less by putting this in lead and putting that towards a siege offense, because I think that this might be a very solid siege offense against teams that simply do not have any any speed lead. Against speed lead, it's always a little bit more dangerous, but there's so many pushbacks, there's so many silences, there's so much good chance for actually landing all of that, except we didn't land the irresistible on the right side right now. But let's see how much damage we're dealing right now, because we could actually put this to a proper rage set in that case. So, okay, damage is definitely a bit less, where we're looking more at like 14-ish Ks. There's a good amount of pushbacks where you definitely go for a hit on this, plus there's armor break and branding the moment that your Tiana's gonna hit. So let's actually put that to the test, where we go for more of a set which is more reliable on these kind of stats, where we can definitely go slower on you. So let's actually go for a proper rage set, and then go for also lower on crit rate. Okay, I kind of wanted to go back and forth with swapping, but didn't work for me right now, so this rune is still kind of there. I kind of went for whatever runes that I could find at the moment that kind of do fit. It is going to be too slow if you do want to use it this way, so I don't really recommend to use it in this particular order. Wait, who's missing something? Oh, I'm just not using all units. Oh, makes sense. So I would say 230 is probably a little bit too slow for using this normally, so I would not really recommend that. But let's just see, for the idea of it, how much damage can we deal if we're looking at something like this. Also, I'm not maxed out on the crit rate. I'm missing like 2 crit rate altogether, but we're just here to see some damage. 22k on the first hit. That is a good bit of damage. I think that can take out a lot of things. So yeah, that definitely does look like things that you could definitely take out. I think that this should be a usable team for your siege offense. So fairly interesting unit. Is he better than Changpong though? Not necessarily, but you can use him into fire units, and that's the main thing. Changpong into fire units is often a bit like, yeah, do you really want to do that? Let's say that there's an LD, Terranese, and Ashur. Then I would rather use this than a Changpong version. To be honest, you can still use a Poseidon version on that, but I think that this would be stronger because of the Terranese maybe hitting hard on your Poseidon or anything like that. So in the end, pretty strong unit. This one, just a pure damage dealer, is more of a siege unit, is more of an arena offense unit. Whereas this one is a bit more all-round. You can kind of use it everywhere, but I think it's more of an RTA unit than anything. Because in RTA, you can use it as the strip. I've seen a lot of people get really good success with it. You can search up this unit and see some replays of other players by simply going to the World Arena. Currently, we only have the Special League, but if you go to Special League, you go to replays, you go to your monster, and then you can select them by the specific monsters, and then you only will see replays with those units. And there's actually a good bit of players playing around with these kind of comps where they use the Chakra, and I would say that the Chakra team is often the winning team as well from what I've seen thus far. However, some people are asking for like a straight up has to be nerfed, but that is one of those things. All of these players are most likely pre-banning Heigang and the Fire Megami. Because of pre-ban of Heigang and Fire Megami, this unit shines a lot more than he would without. So I'm not necessarily sure if he's gonna get a nerf, but I definitely do think he becomes very meta. But you have to keep in mind the 2 hardest counters are most likely counted in the pre-ban. So that is that. Let me know in the comments what you think about these 2 units. Where would you like to use them, or where are you already using them? If there's any other units that you would like me to focus on from the balance patch, in the end, I think that these 2 are the big winners on the balance patch, including the light one, which I don't have. But these 2 seem to be the hard winners of the balance patch. If you have any other units that you might think is like, hey, say, look into this unit from the balance patch, let me know in the comments as well. See you as always in the next one in the Discord, and check out the content tab for the guide video archive, which contains all of the guides that you might need. Hope to see you there.